Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I trust you're all keeping well, and thank you very much for joining us for our Preparing to Deliver the Level 3 Qualification in Site Carpentry and Architectural Joinery webinar. We are all still working from home, therefore I apologise in advance for any background noise and any delay in the slides. You will receive an email with a copy of the PowerPoint, the recording of this webinar, and a certificate of attendance following this webinar. You can access the recordings to all previous webinars and register for up and coming webinars on our Skills for Wales website. You will also receive an email with a link to a survey, which we would be very grateful if you could take the time to fill in this survey, as your feedback is very valuable to us. This is what we'll be discussing this afternoon. We will briefly mention why the transformation of these qualifications, although you may have gone through it previously, we'd just like to reinforce why the transformation has taken place. We will look at the content of the Level 3 qualification, looking specifically at site carpentry and architectural joinery, and the structure of the units that help build the qualification. We'll also have a little in-depth look at the summary of assessments, and we'll also be going through the employer confirmation guide. And then once again, we'll show you the learning resources that are currently available for the Level 3 qualification. And then we will go through and discuss the next steps with you. The presentation will take between 40 to 45 minutes. And then at the end, there will be an opportunity for us to ask us any questions. But if you've got burning questions and you'd like to type them in, please do so by typing any questions that you may have in the questions tab on the right hand side of your screen during the presentation. Here are your presenters today. We've got David Pye, the Senior Technical Advisor for Building Services and also in construction. We've got Jason Howe, the Technical Advisor in construction. And we've got Anne Harrod Lloyd-Benyon with us today, who's the Policy, Stakeholder and Partnership Manager for City and Guilds. And then myself, Ian Roberts, the Technical Advisor in construction. So why the transformation? As we all know by now, in February 2018, Qualifications Wales published the Building the Future report, which was a sector review of the qualifications and the qualification systems in construction and the built environment in Wales. This was following nearly 2 years of consultation that were carried out. Some of Qualifications Wales outlined findings that were inconsistent assessment practice, some areas of learning not effectively being assessed, learners needed to deal with a range of tasks and to be able to problem solve, and that the qualifications weren't meeting the skills needs of Wales. There's also a need to reduce the complexity of the system, as there was also a need to improve the coherence with clear pathways and progression routes needed to be clear through framework and onto work or higher education. On this slide, it shows the type of questions you may have, which I'm not going to go through this slide. As I mentioned earlier, you will be receiving a copy of this presentation. But what you'll see is the questions are, what does the qualification cover? Who is the qualification for? And finally, what will the qualification actually lead to? On this slide, you can now see the current transition arrangements commencing September 2022. You have 2 or 3 pathways, as you can see, as you're working through. This does not include the legacy qualifications at this moment in time, but we can touch on them later on. If a learner starts commencing in September on the foundation qualification, which is for full-time learners. Upon successfully completing the foundation qualification, end of June, July 2023, then will commence in September, provided they have gained employment, onto the new apprenticeship. A foundation learner who is not successful by September 2023 in being able to gain employment will commence on the second year of the progression of a level 2 progression qualification, which is for full-time learners. And then after that, hopefully, by September 2024, that learner then should hopefully then gain employment and move on to the new apprenticeship moving forward. For learners that people believe are not yet ready for the foundation, there is a broad level 1 qualification, and also that you will find out in the very near future that the level 1 trade specific pathways will also be open. A learner completing that after this academic year, I should say September 2022, will commence then in 2023 onto the foundation qualification and then progress onto the apprenticeship and so forth, as you can see. A learner who is successful in gaining employment commencing this September, then that learner will complete and work towards the core and the new apprenticeship immediately. The difference between the core and the foundation qualification is that on the foundation, a learner has got to cover 2 trade areas, where on the core qualification, that learner will just cover the 1 trade area. And that will be the route he's taking or she's taking working towards their apprenticeship. Because the mandatory units within the foundation, which are 6, is the same units as what's currently in the core qualification. I would now like to pass you on to Jason, who will take you through the next set of slides. Thank you for now.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, as we move forward, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to have a look at the actual qualification content in a bit of detail and how the units are structured within our qualification handbooks. So if we move in the slide deck on, please. Thank you, Ian. So looking at it sort of from left to right, just a bit of a recap really, also building upon what Ian's just been talking about with regards to the foundation and progression. From the left-hand side, we have the foundation qualification, and that consists of both construction and BSc pathways, of which learners will undertake 2. It says core also, because obviously, as Ian mentioned, the core qualification is a mandatory part of the apprenticeship qualification, and the core consists of only 1 specific pathway, where the foundation would be 2 to give learners that broad experience. And beneath that is the pre-foundational level 1 qualifications that's available from City and Guilds. With progression, for the progression construction qualifications, those are governed by City and Guilds and the pathways are listed, and our colleagues at EAL look after and review our BSc pathways. With regards to the construction level 3, I know today we're focusing on architectural joinery and site carpentry as listed. Those are the construction pathways again by City and Guilds, and the BSc pathways are by our colleagues and partners at EAL. Next slide, please, Ian. So just to have a quick touch on the rules of combination, which are quite similar, both site carpentry and architectural joinery. So just looking at site carpentry, as Ian mentioned, we have the 6 common core units, and those are the same across all level 3 qualifications, and those are unit 301 to 306. Within the level 3, there are 3 assessment methods, and learners must achieve at least a pass grade or higher in order to be certificated for the qualification. The pathway for site carpentry also has 8 units, which we'll cover shortly. And those 8 units, along with the 6 common core units and the assessment hours, bring a total of 804 GLH, which includes, as I mentioned, the 71 hours for assessment. And the GLH can be a blended delivery either within your centre or within the training provider, or also within industry as well. For the architectural joinery, again, we have the 6 common core units, but architectural joinery, again, it has its own 8 units, which will be bespoke to the pathway. And again, as with the site carpentry and all of the level 3 apprenticeship qualifications, learners must achieve a pass grade or higher in the 3 assessment methods. For architectural joinery, the GLH does differ slightly, so there's 1,085 hours assigned to this qualification pathway, with 107 hours for assessment. Next slide, please, Ian. So these are the 6 common core units, and these are the same across all of the pathways, as I've mentioned, within the level 3 qualifications. And what we have is we have the unit number, we have the unit title, and we have the allocated and assigned GLH, and those are bespoke to each unit, which cover both the learning outcomes and the assessment criteria contained within. So as we start and look at the individual pathways, so looking at site carpentry first, we have the 6 common core units which are listed at the top, and then we have the 8 trade-specific pathway units, which again have their own aligned and assigned GLH in line with the content of each individual unit and what needs to be covered with regards to learning outcomes and assessment criteria. And then, as recorded, we have the assessment GLH recorded on there also, giving you a grand total for site carpentry of 804 hours. Looking at architectural joinery now, so again we have the 6 common core units, and we have the architectural joinery trade-specific units, of which there is 8. Some of them may be similar to the site carpentry, such as Unit 207 aligns with Unit 212 for site carpentry, similar same GLH, etc. But obviously, with the architectural joinery, there are 107 hours aligned to assessment, which gives you a total of 1,085 hours overall. So we're just going to have a quick look at the unit structure, and if you're familiar with City and Guilds qualifications, hopefully the unit structure will be familiar to you as well within the qualification handbooks. Just before we move on, all of the qualification handbooks and all of the assessment materials that we're showing you and that we're showcasing today can be located on the Skills for Wales website. And we would encourage that you go along to the website to download that information and those handbooks and assessment packs. So with regards to how the units are structured, we know we have the learning outcomes, and those are chunks of knowledge and practical skill requirements that are contained within the actual unit. So that is what a learner must be able to either understand or be able to do following all of their teaching and learning. After that, you have the assessment criteria. So this breaks down the learning outcome into a bit more detail, and this covers exactly what would have to be assessed in line with that learning outcome. Below that, we'll have a range, and the range basically covers the breadth of what will be required and what is specific to the assessment criterion. And again, these are familiar formats as to what you may have been used to with City and Guilds qualifications. We have an additional support mechanism within there that will hopefully support your teachers and tutors in the planning and delivery of the qualifications and assessments. What we advise is that all of the content within the range is covered through the teaching and learning sessions, either by the training provider or within the industry environment. Next slide, please, Ian. Thank you. So just looking at the structure of a unit, again, you'll see that it's a familiar format. At the top, we have the unit number and title, followed by the GLH, and then a brief description of what the unit's about. And that can be used to inform learners of what each unit is about. So if you wanted to hand that out at the beginning of the program or as they move on to a new unit, it's quite useful just to give learners and employers an insight into what's being covered. And then obviously followed by that, you have your learning outcomes. What we'll see beneath that is that beneath the learning outcomes, next slide, please, Ian. Beneath the learning outcomes, we then have the criteria. And then beneath the criteria, we have the range. And again, the range just covers the breadth of what needs to be covered in the assessment criteria. What is new, however, is the delivery outcome section, which is highlighted in blue on the screen there. And what that does, that takes the range and the criteria and gives more depth of content that should be delivered. And within this one, you'll see as we showcase other units, these can differ in how they're formatted on screen, such as in sentences like this or in bullet points, to again give guidance to tutors on what is exactly required with regards to delivery of content. Next slide, please, Ian. So this is one of the trade units that's contained in both site carpentry and architectural joinery. So a GLH aligned is 50 hours, and then again it gives you the brief description and the learning outcome. So it's very similar, if not it's exactly the same, in fact, as the one of the common core unit structures. So hopefully you'll see that, and having it standardized allows for easy navigation through the qualification handbooks. Next slide, please. And again, just to showcase that you have the learning outcome followed by the criteria and the range, and then you have the delivery outcome as shown on screen. And as I mentioned previously, this one has bullet points as opposed to a sentence format. So hopefully that is a useful format for tutors who are going to be delivering these qualifications and delivering the unit content. Next slide, please, Ian. I'm now going to hand you over to my colleague Ian, who's going to take you through the summary of assessment and some future slides. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason. And I'm going to start commencing by going through the brief summary of the assessments, and then we'll go a little bit more in depth as we work through the slides as you can come along, and you'll see that as we're moving forward. So first of all, what we've got here, this is covering the architecture, joinery and site carpentry level 3 qualification, and is assessed using 3 methods of assessment. Not too dissimilar to what we've got with the previous, what we've carried out on the foundation and the progression of the core qualification. They all follow the similar pattern. The on-screen assessment, multiple choice questions, externally set and externally marked. And as before, it's got an overall weighting of 20%. You will see that this will include test 1 and test 2, which I will come back to later on in the next few slides we're going to be going through. The practical project, covering the trade area that the learner will be working towards. This is carried out within industry, set in agreement with the employer and assessed by the assessor employed by the training provider. This will then be externally quality assured and has an overall weighting of 60% of the overall of the qualification. The professional discussion is one externally set and externally marked by a trade-specific member of the awarding organisation with an overall weighting of 20%. We will be going through each method of assessment in the coming slides. But before we move on, I would just like to reinforce what Jason's mentioned. We have an assessment pack, qualification handbooks, detailing the requirements of the assessments that can be downloaded from the Skills for Wales website. And the link is at the bottom there for you to be able to use once you get the set of slides. Excuse me. Within this slide, I would just like to now go through in more depth each method of assessment. The on-screen assessment contains 2 tests, test 1 and test 2, and can be taken at any stage in the assessment process. Although this is on demand and completed at any time, it is advisable to complete prior to the professional discussion. Test 1 contains 45 questions and the learner will have 70 minutes to complete. This, however, may have been completed during their second year, or a learner who may have completed their progression qualification within the same trade area will have achieved this as it is the same test. So a learner who's probably completed a progression qualification and then sidestepped across into the apprenticeship because they have been able to gain employment, then they will, provided it's the same trade area, they will have completed test 1. Test 2 then is completed in the final year. And as you can see here, the site carpentry is 30 questions and the learner will have 45 minutes to complete. Where the architectural joinery, the learner will have to complete 35 questions or answer 35 questions and will have 55 minutes to complete that particular process accordingly. The practical project is made up of 3 elements. They're very similar to what we have in the foundation and progression, which is planning, performing and evaluating are the 3 elements. The project is got to be carried out in the realistic working environment. The learner can select from a number of tasks that are outlined within the assessment pack and cannot exceed any more than 4 work-based tasks. Of course, that will be in line with what the employer can provide. And that's where the discussions have got to be taking place. The assessor employed by the training provider will carry out the assessment visits, which will include a minimum of 3 visits. The professional discussion will be carried out by a member of the awarding organisation and will be occupationally competent. This will be carried out in a one-time sitting and can be either virtual or face-to-face. The professional discussion will last no more than 40 minutes and will be graded past the distinction, with an additional 5 minutes allocated or will be allowed, provided the learner is into the final question. The learner will need to demonstrate of their knowledge, understanding and performance from the occupational standards relevant to their trade. They will also be required to reflect on the practical project they have completed within their discussion. The professional discussion can only take place once the learner has completed their project and the employer confirmation document, which we will go through shortly. The online assessments will contain engaging multiple choice question types and styles and are all online with the results received immediately after the assessment. Test 1 may have been achieved previously, as we've stated, if the learner successfully completed their progression qualification within the same trade. If the learner has not taken the progression qualification, then the learner will have to sit and achieve both Test 1 and Test 2. Here you can see on the right side of the assessment information for Test 2 regarding the site carpenter, where it contains 30 questions and the learner will require a minimum of 20 correct responses to attain a pass. And the learner will have 45 minutes to complete that particular assessment. We're now going to cover in more detail the practical project. With regards to site carpentry and architectural joinery, a learner will have 12 hours to complete all of their planning. And this may include up to 4 tasks or projects that will be carried out within industry. They will then have 44 hours for site carpentry to carry out the performing and 80 hours for architectural joinery to complete their performing overall, and 12 hours then is allocated to complete the evaluation of the tasks they have included within their project. A gentle reminder that the project cannot include any more than 4 work-based tasks. Also to remind people that the time allocated for the planning, if a learner completes in 8 hours, the additional 4 hours cannot be allocated to either the performing or the evaluating at the time. And same applies if they complete the performing within less time than has been actually allocated. As previous, further information can be located on the website within the practical project section of the assessment pack, which gives you more information if you still require that additional clarification. With regards to the professional discussion, here you can see a brief overview of the content and timings. The units we have identified, along with the learner reflection on the practical project, this should help you in supporting the learner in being prepared to meet the external assessor. And the learner can have the documentation with them while they are carrying out the professional discussion. And this is to help the learner make reference to in case they need that particular support as they're working through it themselves. And as you can see, the discussion will have to be recorded and captured in a secure GDPR compliant way. Once again, before we move on, I'd just like to reinforce that the professional discussion will be conducted by a competent external assessor. We are all aware that there is no NVQ within the level 3 qualification. Learners, however, still have to gain the skills, knowledge and within industry to carry out and fulfill their role within the construction industry. Within this slide, we can make reference to the employer confirmation and how this will help support the learner in meeting the qualification requirements and attaining their CSCS card. The guide which I will go through provides guidance to employers and training providers and how the occupational competency statements set by industry will have been met. This document, when completed, will provide employers, federations and industry the confidence that the learner has provided evidence of meeting the occupational competency statements. The overall qualification will be graded pass, merit through to distinction to help differentiate the achievement between learners. Provisional grades for the practical project will undergo internal and external quality assurance. The professional discussion that will be carried out by a member of the awarding organisation will confirm the grade, and the overall final grade for all the components will be issued by City and Guilds for construction, and if it's building services, then it would be EAL. Learners can resit assessments or make a resubmission when a learner fails to achieve a pass grade in any of the assessments. Guidance on the resits, etc. can be found in the assessment pack, although I'm just going to go back and touch on and provide a brief overview on the resit and the resubmissions. Taking each one in turn, the first one, which is the on-screen assessment, although there are no limits to the number of times a learner can take, you should provide additional learning prior to a retake. When a retake is taken, the learner can still achieve the full marks and grades available. What we have to remember, there will be additional cost incurred taking additional on-screen assessments. So it is crucial and critical before the learner sits that they are ready to take the on-screen assessment. The practical project, here you can see the opportunities, and rather than having to resit the entire project, they can retake or take the criteria that they failed. For example, regarding the planning, if they do not meet the threshold pass, then they can resubmit the criteria that they have failed, will be reassessed within the resubmission. Regarding the professional discussion, when a learner fails to successfully achieve, then they are permitted to resit and must resit the whole professional discussion. Once again, that will be through an external member of the awarding organisation who will be trade specific. But once again, the learner can achieve the full range of marks, and any resits, like a resit on the on-screen assessment, will have to be booked via Walled Garden. I would now like to go through and provide a brief overview of the employer confirmation guide. But before I begin, I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you to all stakeholders for their valuable contribution and feedback we have received, and that has helped the consortium in shaping what I'm about to present. The employer confirmation is part of the learner journey and will help strengthen the relationship between employers, centres and the learner, to which was clearly outlined within the review that took place wasn't adequate or sufficient. This is only part of the learner journey, and the process will enhance the employer role in the delivery of the new apprenticeship qualifications in the construction and built environment sector. As we are aware, the learner will spend a considerable amount of their time in the realistic working environment, and the purpose of the confirmation sign-off is to capture the activities and provide stakeholders, including trade bodies, confidence that the learner is occupationally proficient and has covered the full range of the relevant standards. This is to allow the learner to progress for the final part of their assessment process, which is, as we all know by now, the professional discussion. Although there is no MVQ within the new apprenticeship model, a learner will still provide a range of evidence that allows the centre to check the employer confirmatory sign-off is valid. Upon successful completion of this process and the confirmatory sign-off, a learner will then be in a position to obtain the relevant skills card. We are aware that the employer confirmation process is new and may raise a few concerns. Moving forward, the consortium will still continue to provide centres and employers with the instructions and requirements for completing this process within the employer confirmation guide, which will be further communicated at our centre and employer events that are being scheduled at this moment in time to be carried out in May and June, and at times to meet employer needs. Once they have been set, the time set, they can be located on the Skills for Wales website, although we will be sending updates out just to remind people when they are ready to be taking place. So here we are now, we can see how working collaboratively we can support that learner along their journey. They will then require to move forward and progress to the final assessment, of which is a robust assessment process. And we all know now that it's the professional discussion. As you can see on the slide, by working together, employers and centres will provide opportunities that will allow the learner to gain valuable industrial experience and complete the activities outlined with the employer confirmation guide. And the activities outlined with the employer confirmation guide has to be carried out in industry. Whether it be 1, 2 or 3 employers, they will work with the learners throughout their apprenticeship. Hence the reasons why we make provisions within the employer confirmation guide on the relevant forms for more than one employer to work on the documents. This is to help support learners through the shared apprenticeship scheme, Safle and Apprentice, who share the learners to other employers. Work-based learning providers and centres will work with employers to guide and support to ensure the occupational competency statement log is being completed correctly. As you can see, the pieces will then start to come together, and this is through working collaboratively together to ensure the learner journey runs smoothly. This process is to ensure that learner is prepared for the final assessment. As you can imagine, this hasn't been a smooth journey, as change is always and sometimes very difficult to accept. We have engaged with a considerable number of stakeholders, including micro businesses, medium to large contractors, and federations, including colleges and private training providers. Within this slide, you can see the front page, the content and the section that is contained within the employer confirmation guide. This document is in English and in Welsh, so the learners and employers can choose which language they will prefer it to be in. Whether it be 1, 2 or 3 employers, they will work with the learners throughout their apprenticeship. Hence the reasons why we have made provision on the various forms for more than one employer to work on the documents. The employer confirmation guide will be trade specific and will be located on the Skills for Wales website under its own trade area. The document will be in a writable PDF and can be completed either electronically or hard copy. The employer confirmation is the responsibility of the employer and learner working collaboratively with the learning provider. Although not part of the qualification, this has to be completed prior to the learner moving forward to complete their final assessment, which is the professional discussion. I would now like to pass you on to David, who will take you through the next set of slides. Thank you for now.
Thank you very much, Ian. We do have a couple of questions come up, but we'll drop back onto those in a moment. Just a quick note that I have dropped in a couple of links to the survey. So if you look at the chat, if you can click on that, it will open up, and then hopefully you can complete that quickly at the end of this session. But we're going to work through just a few slides before we open it up to further questions. And thank you very much to Jason and Ian for that part of the presentation. Our first step to access information will be the Skills for Wales website. So I know from the questions you've already been accessing that, or at least some of you. From there, you'll see under the qualifications tab a list of sectors. Click on your sector, scroll down to the bottom tab titled Qualification Documents. Here you'll find two documents, the handbook, and secondly, the employer confirmatory sign-off. The handbook contains content along with various requirements for the qualification. So it's always the best starting point to download the handbook. You'll also find various other supporting documents on the website, which covers the qualifications from foundation through to level 3 qualifications. So please familiarise yourselves with the website and the documents. So now we'll move on to the delivery planner. Many of you should be familiar with this from previous webinars and from using them to support delivery of the foundation qualification. The delivery planner is fully adaptable and equally as useful for delivering the level 3 qualifications. Please allow time to consider your delivery and your timings. And if you wish to fill this document in and share it with myself, Ian, or Jason, we'll happily have a look and we can have a chat about it to see if we can offer any support that way as well. Okay, thank you, Ian. As previously promoted, we do have a full suite of sector books from Hodder Education. To support the new suite of qualifications, Hodder have created 3 mapping documents to support staff and learners in accessing related information. Please contact Thomas Stotter direct for more information. His email address is on the screen now. So have a look at that slide. Please make direct contact with Thomas to get access to the supporting documentation. So now we'll move on to next steps, and this part of the update we'll be going through the next steps, and we'll commence with the centre approval journey. So as we move on to this, we can see that the centre approval commenced in January 21 with the foundation and progression, and now closely followed by the level 3 qualification. Provided you haven't already gained centre approval, following slides will help provide a broad overview of the approval journey for centres. As we're aware, these are brand new qualifications and an offline application has to be completed. If not already done so, it is available on the Become a Centre section of the Skills for Wales website, and it's for all qualifications for both awarding bodies. Centres only need to complete one application, and on completion, it should be forwarded to skillsforwales.quality@sittingales.com. This section also includes a really useful FAQ document around approvals. So let's move on and see what this actually means in the process. So centres can expect a decision about the approval within 30 working days of completing the application. Please note, separate approvals must be submitted for sub-centres. Centres do not need to invent new documentation for these qualifications. So if you've already got your IQA planners, sample plans, assessor review forms, all of those documents that you normally use can easily be adapted for these new qualifications. So let's move on to the next slide and have a look at the future training events. Well, you're already on one of these now, but there are others that you may be interested in or want to share with colleagues. These are brand new qualifications, and we recommend you take the time, if you're interested in any of the further sessions, to register. There are also CPD events taking place. These have all been arranged with your managers. So please have a chat to your managers if you're not aware of which CPD event your centre has been invited to. We have 3 happening next week. So we're out on the road on Monday. So as you can see, there's many trade specifics, and BSCS being confirmed at the moment. So we should have dates from our colleagues at the consortium on those dates very soon. So there's a lot of information to get through there, a lot to consider, a lot to reflect on. We appreciate your patience in listening to us. What we'll do now is we'll just give you a moment to reflect on those things, have a good think about some of your pinch points, your questions, your queries, even just things for thoughts, something you want to process and think about. If there's anything you want us to cover again, please drop in the questions tab and we'll take that to the panel to discuss. So plenty of questions there. The first one, which I can probably put to Ian, it says there are options of 3 tests on the Skills Wales website. I did respond because I wasn't quite sure what we were looking at. I don't know if you can help with that, Ian. Does that make sense to you, that query?
Right, I'm presuming you're referring to the one on the core qualification as well. So on the core qualification, there's a knowledge test there that they have to complete, which covers the common core units, and which is a 6 core knowledge units. So I'm presuming that's the one you mean, plus the test 1s and test 2, which goes into the apprenticeship. So rather than name them 1, 2, and 3, they're actually the core qualification is really separate because it's covering the equivalent to what's in the foundation, which is a mandatory requirement of the apprenticeship framework when it's finally finalised. And then, of course, you've got the test 1 and 2, which is part of the apprenticeship. So I'm presuming that's where you mean the 3 knowledge tests. All right, but the one on the core will just cover the 6 core units that's in the foundation as well as the core qualification. If I'm incorrect, just let me know, but that's the ones I believe you're referring to.
Thank you very much, Ian. And then there's a number of questions which all kind of link to each other. So what I may do is read them all out because it may be easy to answer in one. So bear with me for a moment. What's the role of the assessor, learner and the employer in terms of portfolio of evidence? In terms of practical project, is the plan expected to be in the classroom or on site? Taking the practical project, are they marked summative or do they have to pass the planning before going on to the practical project? What evidence is needed from the observation visits from the assessor of the on-site visits? I'm already picking up a bit of confusion around which, the employer confirmation we sign off is a build-up of experience that the learner does before taking the project, which is when the assessor from the centre goes out and assesses. So we need to realise these are separate now, and one takes place before the other to make sure that the learner is ready. But I'll just carry on with some of the questions, Ian, and then maybe I'll summarise them all, just so everyone on this webinar is aware of the type of query coming through. What evidence is needed from the learner employer in line with the employer confirmation guide? How many times does the learner have to demonstrate the skills as in the employer confirmation guide? There are 4 separate occasions, and what evidence is needed of this? Other than the employer confirmation guide, are there any literature given to employers? So there are some further questions, but they're all around that evidence gathering and the project. So it might be easy to answer them all in one go, Ian.
I will do my best for people. First of all, right, we'll do our best, to be honest. Okay, although there's no NVQ within the level 3 qualification, learners to get the CSCS card have still got to gather evidence from industry to prove that they're proficient in what they're doing at that moment in time. So although there's going to be no portfolio, because Qualifications Wales were adamant they did not want a portfolio of evidence. They didn't want to go back to the draconian style where you had a big wad of evidence, and really half of it didn't mean an awful lot as it were moving forward, to be honest, because it were replicating what they'd already done. So the idea is, okay, when you look at the employee confirmation guide, it says a minimum of 15 pieces of evidence to try and condense it as you're working through, which is really in the CITB's consolidated assessment strategy as well as. So that's what it means. And it's really, they don't like the word portfolio. It's classed as a file of evidence, if you want to start picking up words. And it's not, well, that's what it is anyway. It's going to be a file of evidence to support that. The documentation in the employee confirmation guide, although it's a tick box, they've got to have evidence to support when that tick goes in, that particular tick on that opposite that statement that's actually in there moving forward. What you'll also find as well is it's the employer that makes the decision on the evidence that's being submitted. They're the ones through the eyes of QW and industry that have got the knowledge of what industry standards are, and we can all agree or disagree on that, but that's what the requirement is moving forward. Regarding the project is carried out on site in a realistic working environment, not separate. It's what's naturally occurring with that particular employer. So when that employer is, sorry, I should take a step back. When the learner is carrying out the project, that employer can also stipulate and say, right, for example, it could be putting a traditional roof on, for example. If the learner's putting a traditional roof on and it mainly only happen every 6 or 8 months, he doesn't need to duplicate that work. What he would do is he could build that as part of his project. So he'd do the planning and then do the reviewing of it, and then he'd do the evaluating of it to move forward. That can be logged onto his employee confirmation guide, okay? But also the assessor could also be assessing it as well as you're moving that forward. So that's another way it can be done to move that forward. So that's the type of evidence that will be in there. The assessor that's going out there will be observing the candidate, a candidate carrying it out, the activity that they have planned for. All right. Don't have to communicate with the employer to say, yeah, that's fine or anything else. They will go out there, they will mark it accordingly to say, yeah, that is meeting the particular industry requirements or the standards it's outlined within. So it's the industry standards that they're actually working towards to be able to do that. So when we're looking at the type of evidence that they're then gathering, it is out in industry. Now the planning of it can be done in a classroom based. Yes, it can. All right. So what would happen there is, while they're in the college environment, they can be through the support. They can be then starting to plan. So they do the research. They can plan it accordingly. Then obviously they'd have to run that past the employer as well to make sure that employer is saying, yes, that's fine. The risk assessment's there. The method statement or whatever it's going to do, that will be there to be able to show and demonstrate that they've carried that particular task out as they're moving forward. So the assessor, when the assessor goes on site, they will record and report what they've done, and they will complete the relevant documentation that will be there to help them to support that learner has met the standard that's required to be able to move that. So it's really a relationship as well that the assessor or the college or the training provider has got to build that rapport with the employer, because what happens is when you do the induction, you'll also obviously have to outline to the employer the activities, although the employer will be aware of this, what's actually happening, because the way we're getting that message out to employers as well is that we're liaising very closely with CITB. We're attending and presenting at the Federation of Master Builders, national events, regional events. We're attending and presenting at the Federation of Small Builders, the CUFLI, the apprentices, the National Federation of Builders, and also we're also sharing this out with the CITB field officers as well to make sure that they're sending that message out. To help reinforce this as well, we've had events over the last 18 months where we've had employers attending bi-monthly focus group meetings. Not everybody's attended, fully agree, But what we're also doing is sending out over nearly 200 emails every month out to employers, informing them of all these and what's happening and the changes and what their commitment's going to have to be able to move that forward. So it's that. CITB are also looking to build that into the grant scheme to make sure they complete it correctly. But not only that, they're also sending out the information to them and building it into the apprenticeship frameworks as well. They're looking at ways they can build it into that. But then come May and June, like we've already mentioned earlier, I mentioned earlier, we've got 4 events purely, and the webinars purely on the employer confirmation guide, and that'll be on the types of evidence, how to complete the document correctly, not just for centres, but employers as well as. And we're not holding them between 9 till 5. We've got one between 9 till 5, and the other 3 are between the hours of 5 and 8 on an evening, to make sure we can try and get as many people as we can and employers to it as we're moving forward. But as I say, we're attending and we're presenting at the Federation of Master Builders National Conference meeting, which is on the 16th, I do believe, 16th of March, and that's between 5 and 6:30. We've got the Federation of Small Builders that we're doing. We presented 2 weeks ago at the Regional Skills, Cardiff Regional Skills Partnership, and the other one, sorry, I apologise, I forgot the other one as well, down in Cuffley, that Cuffley ran with Colic Cigar. We presented at theirs as well to make sure we try to move that forward. So it's all about making sure we can get that information out there and sharing it so employers are aware of this. The employers will gain the confirmation guide. They will have access to the confirmation guide. It's on the Skills for Wales website now. We're going to have to make a couple of slight amendments to the employer confirmation guide. For example, the guides we're going to have to do is they don't like the word apprentice in there now, so we're going to have to change the apprentice to a learner. There's just a couple of other things in how we can recognise recognition of prior learning or accreditation of prior learning, so we're going to be building that in. For example, a learner that's completed a level 2 framework this year that has to step into the new level 3 framework, we can't expect them to having to redo everything. So what we're doing at the moment, we're putting a considerable number of mapping documents in place, which I'll come to in a moment, to help them do that. On the employer confirmation guide, you will see there's 4 separate occasions where an employer can sign that learner off as completing that particular activity. The reason we put 4 in there for, and if you look at the document a little bit more closely, it's for employer 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if there's only one employer looking at that, that employer will then confirm that that learner is proficient at that moment in time. So if that employer says, right, you've done it the first time, it's not really up to it, you would not tick the box accordingly until that learner has improved his proficient by the next attempt. So you may only see one mark on that particular criteria, but that's not to say the learner's only met it on that one occasion. He may have met it, or he or she may have met it on, or attempted it on more than one occasion, but the moment that employer says that learner is proficient, that's when he signs that particular document off, or he puts a tick in the box. It may happen where you get then through the shared apprenticeship scheme, or where a learner moves from one employer to another. So what actually happens is that employer may have said, yeah, he's met that particular requirement. He goes to the next employer and he does it again. So rather than waste that other opportunity, that other employer may put a mark in there as well to say, yeah, he's still proficient in what he's actually done. But we're only looking for at least one mark, one tick in that particular box. And if he says, yeah, he's proficient at that moment in time, and they've done that, and there's evidence there to support it, then that will suffice to be able to move that. So that's why the confirmation guide is there, to be able to move that forward. What we'll also be doing as well, inside the confirmation guide, there's guidance in the first 7 or 8 pages on how to complete the guide, moving that forward. We'll be doing training with them as well. We'll also be doing training with colleges and stakeholders. Is it going to sink in on the first attempt we tell them? No, it isn't. Are they going to rely heavily on colleges for the first initial 12, 18 months? I would say yes, they are. Because we're in it together. It's collaborating together, it's working together to make sure we can do that closely. Because if we don't, and we just try and leave employers on their own, then we're going to experience great difficulties moving down the line. And if we can build up that relationship with employers, like you already are doing, we've got to maintain that relationship as we actually work through them with it, which is going to be crucial. If we don't build that relationship and we don't work with them, then we are going to inherit one or two problems, because that document has got to be completed, because if it's not completed, the learner cannot progress to the professional discussion. And even beyond that, the learner's not going to get the CSCS card, which is reliant heavily upon that. We have kept sharing it every step of the way, and there's like an 8-step guide in there that's supporting you on what to do. We will be putting additional documentation out to employers and to yourselves to make sure everybody fully understands that as we're moving forward. So hopefully it will, you know, as I say, it will work. Well, it's got to work. There has got to be a couple of amendments, like we've said, changing the word from apprentice to a learner. That way then, the reason why they want the apprentice name taken out for, the document then is open more to the experienced person coming, a more mature learner coming in. So they could also use the same confirmation guide to be able to work and move that forward, is what they're actually after. So I hope that answers that. The practical work tasks will the learner be asked to complete in college. It's no different to what you're doing now, to be honest, because the learner was still going to need the training as they're working towards the skills and knowledge and understanding that they're going to require. So they're going to need that. I think the main thing we've got to remember is that the learner spends a considerable amount of their time out in industry. And while they're out there, they're still building the skills, the knowledge, the understanding as they're working towards. But there's going to be some times when a learner may only ever see one activity per his apprenticeship or per his particular lifetime, to be honest. Now, that's where the learner's got to have that particular training while they're in college. So he can gain that training in college, so then they're then prepared when they actually go out there to be able to do that. There'll be no practical synoptics actually set by us as an awarding organisation. The one that will be set when you look in the practical project tasks assessment pack, they've got to do to cover them particular hours and cover the relevant criteria that's in there. Now that can be through one work-based activity, or it can be through 4 work-based activities. That's something that you're going to have to work closely with the employer to see what they actually do, to be able to see how they can do it and move that forward. We've always said that there's no portfolio, but all an employer checklist packs, there's a section what is required to be the portfolio of evidence requirements. I'm sorry if there's reference to a portfolio of evidence requirements. If you could let us know where it stipulates that portfolio of evidence requirements, that would be an error on our part, I'll be perfectly honest. Because one thing QW were adamant about, that they do not want the word portfolio putting in there. So it's going to be like a file of evidence, to be honest, but the file of evidence, we've got to try and keep it to a minimum as we possibly can, because we don't want the draconian style of evidence where it's weight rather than quality amount of evidence that's actually in there. Okay. I'm just
Thanks, Ian. That's a really comprehensive response. Hopefully that's been helpful. I know it's difficult to grasp. If I can share a brief experience of something I've worked on over a couple of years, which is a similar change to this, where one trade area in England, they're developing a journal, and the journal is evidence of work that they're on, but it's not assessed work. It's signed by the employer, it's monitored by the provider and the tutors, and then on completion of that, it suggests that they're ready then, and then they take the summative end assessment. So I kind of see this in a similar way. It's evidence that is monitored and considered just to make sure we're comfortable the learner is getting that experience, that the employers are satisfied with that work that they're doing, it's meeting the appropriate standards that we're comfortable with, and then on completion, we feel comfortable that they're ready to take the practical project. So I just find that an easier way to sort of make sense of it, and hopefully that will become a bit more natural in time. Lots of other questions that I've tried to answer some as we go. So the application number and comms in the frameworks, it's not something we set ourselves, that's set as part of the framework. And I believe in building services, those framework reviews have been completed. In construction, I believe they're still live, or they're finishing very soon, aren't they, Ian?
Yeah, they are, David. I mean, there's one particular question, David, if you don't mind, if I can just jump in. It's about the legacy qualifications. So in other words, and it's a really good question, to be honest, what happens to the learners that are on the level 2 legacy qual? And then we'll pick up on the full-time diploma ones as well. As I've mentioned earlier, these are the couple of slight amendments that we're going to have to do to the employee confirmation guide. But the first one is we're putting mapping documents together. Now, we've already done one, and we've run it past some colleges and some contacts in colleges, and also run it past QW. The one we've done, they're highly delighted with it. And what we've done with that one is it maps a learner who's on a full-time diploma level 2 course, who's mapping across, who gets an apprenticeship and sidesteps straight across into an apprenticeship. What we've done is we've risk rated it, or RAG rated, I should say, red, amber, and green. All right. Green means it's fully covered. Red, obviously, it's not covered at all, and amber means it's part way covered. We've done it for the all level 2, or we will be doing it for all level 2 diplomas across all 11 trade areas. We're also doing it for the NVQ as well. So a learner who completes an NVQ level 2 framework and sidesteps onto the new level 3 will also be producing that as well. So don't get me wrong, it's going to take time, I'll be honest, but we've done one just to show people, and now we've got that, we can then run with that. It will be in English as well as Welsh medium, and we'll put it onto the Skillful Wales website at side of, or we're looking to put it at the side of the employer confirmation guide. So at least the 2 documents are together. But the employer confirmation guide then will reference across to the mapping document. So you'll have to work with them both together. All right. And I hope that answers your question on that. Okay, David.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ian. They're really helpful. Some really good questions as well. If we can, if there's any that we've not answered to your satisfaction or further questions, please type them away now. Some of them are quite detailed, and we may have to go away and make some checks, things like the wording in certain booklets, if there could be errors, or we may not be understanding exactly what you're getting at. Please use the survey or the Skills for Wales email address to log those, and we can, when we've got a bit more time, we can open all the documents, we can make sure we have a thorough look at it so we give you a good answer. So if you won't mind just clicking on the last 2 slides whilst we wait for any final questions, please, Ian. So what we do ask you for, please, is that you complete that survey. It's so helpful. The important thing about the surveys is they are logged centrally and shared with all the key stakeholders. So the comments that you make on there, your feedback, is really helpful to us. There may be queries on these qualifications, but equally, if these are helpful, if at the end of these you know more than you did when you started, then hopefully we're making progress. If you've been able to ask the questions you've not been able to do before, you know, they're hopefully very valuable sessions. It's great for us to hear that as well, because the more we see the value in these sessions, the easier it is for us to put more sessions on. So if you'd like to see more webinars, more face-to-face, other sessions in future, please put that down as well. So yeah, just a big shout out. The links are in the chat there.
David, just one more question, if I may, that's come up about the depth of evidence that's going to be required. One thing we've got to remember, ladies and gentlemen, is that it's not so much the amount of evidence, and it ain't got to be as great in depth as what we've had currently for the MVQ, because what we've got here as well, don't forget, they've got to have evidence to map in that they've actually carried out the activity, but it's not reams or a full report or anything like that. Photographic evidence, a quick video that can be provided as evidence in the file, things like that would go down a treat, to be honest, because what we do have, we've got the project. The project is carried out and assessed by the assessor. So this is where the assessment part comes into it. So where you've got a portfolio of evidence previously, we know, although you did have forms of evidence of assessed, it isn't being assessed as in depth as what this new level 3 qualification is. So please, the types of evidence can come. It can be a photographic evidence with a brief statement. It can be video evidence. It is outlined within the employer confirmation guide. Sorry about the minimum 15 piece of evidence. Look at the consolidated assessment strategy, but we'll go more in great detail on that moving forward. But what we've got to remember is it's the assessment process. The assessor is making the decision that that project, which is meeting the outcomes and the assessment criteria, is the learner is meeting that particular requirement. And if they isn't or they aren't, then they would fail the project. And then they would have to be reassessed on that, moving that forward. So it's the assessor that makes the judgment, but he's being assessed rather than just assessing supplementary evidence that's coming in. I hope that answers your question. Sorry, David, over to you, mate.
No, that's fine. Thanks, Ian. I think we're hopefully helping make sense of it for everyone. I think Ian's explained it really well. And again, I think the point he's trying to make is it's more of a light touch because we're just looking at evidence of those activities taking place. It's not your rubber stamp, right? You've completed this portfolio, therefore you've passed. You still have your on-site assessment following that. So it's a lighter touch as part of that journey. We don't want to see 3 lever arts files full of evidence per learner. You know, that's moving away from what we want to move away from that. So just a final slide before I drop back and check any final questions. The skillsforwales.customer@citymeals.com is another very helpful email address. Please make a note of that. Any questions you don't get answered or any other further queries that you have, please email that address. Copy ourselves in as well if you like. And again, that query line is logged. So if it's just one centre asking a question, we could think, oh, it's just that one centre who didn't notice something. If 10 centres ask the same thing, we can see it much more easily when it goes to the same inbox. And we can look back at the paperwork and say, oh, we need to make changes or we need to improve some of our documents. So please make a note of that email address. There's one more question. Is the planning section completed with the learner and assessor or the learner and a college tutor? So I would say that initially it's invigilated in controlled conditions and then it is assessed. So it depends on which role that you're taking at the time. Does that make sense, Ian?
Hey, David, I lost you then. My IT went down, I'm afraid, but it's come back up. I don't know what happened. Sorry, what were the question, David?
So is the planning section completed with the learner and assessor or the learner and the college tutor? Now, the way I would describe that is it depends on which stage of that you're at. It'll be done in control conditions and that'll be invigilated at that time, and on completion it would be assessed. So it would depend on what role was the person was taking responsibility for at the time. I don't know if you see it the same way, Ian?
Yes, I do. It's the assessor that's got to make the final judgment. As long as, you know, that's the crucial factor. It's the internal assessor from the college, because he's the one that's going out on site visiting as well, isn't he?
Yeah, thanks. And they've got to link up. You know, there's should be a synergy between the planning and the doing. So it's meaningful planning for that learner. It's not just another task they've got to do. Hopefully it complements what activity they're doing and it will help them do a good job of that practical activity. So trying to look for them being supportive of each other. So I hope we've answered all your questions. We may have missed some as we've scrolled through. Apologies if we have. It wasn't on purpose. If there's anything we've missed, please drop it in again. We'll only stay on another few minutes. If there's no more questions coming on, we can close. It doesn't mean this is the end of your opportunity to ask questions. As I say, please stay in touch and there'll be further support in future. and each time there's more information comes out. So we do a bit of a recap, and hopefully more information comes out then. So just a shout out for, oh, so sorry, the college tutor and assessor are two different people. Well, they may be, that's fine. They may, it depends if you're invigilating or if you're assessing. If you're assessing, you've got to be the assessor. If you're just invigilating the activity, then you know you can be a tutor as long as you're meeting all the rules of that assessment. But it depends if you're asking, you know, do they have to be an assessor at that time? Well, at the time they're doing it, they're invigilating to make sure that it's being done correctly. At the time of assessing, then you have to be a qualified assessor, whether that's your on-site assessor or an in-centre assessor, or they're working together, and whichever approach you take, that'd be largely down to the centre, I would assume. I hope I've understood the question correctly. Yeah, the tutors are qualified assessors too in most cases. That's the norm, I would say. You know, you'll have a team of tutors and assessors, and they'll often hold both roles at the same time. So it's no different really now than what you have with current assessments. There'll be more than one assessment very often on courses, and you may team teach or even team assess. As long as that is managed and quality assured, you know, there's no hard and fast rule as long as it's meeting the requirements of the assessment and assessment rules.
David, there's just a couple of things I think we need to clarify. First of all, just to be clear, a learner who starts the level 3 qualification this September has to build in the core, not the progression. They have to build in the core qualification, not the progression, and then jump on to the continue through to the level 3. The progression qualification is for people that's full-time or full-time. The other one is what happens to the level 2 legacy qualifications on the framework. Let's finish an MVQ and diploma. They have to start or continue this September onto the new level 3. That's why the mapping documents are there for. We're putting the mapping documents in place. Just to be clear, so a learner that's completing the level 2 framework this year cannot continue onto the legacy level 3 framework. They will go onto the new level 3 framework. But the evidence that they've already got can be APL'd across. Okay? Thank you, David.
No, thank you, Ian. Thank you. I've tried to answer those as I've typed away. Again, any other confusion about that, just a last shout out really for questions to come in, please. So any final questions, please type them away now. We'll try and get them all answered. Just to clarify, as I think I've missed the answer, does the learner have to pass the planning before moving on to the performance criteria, and then pass the performance criteria before evaluating? Well, naturally they would do all the planning first before taking the practical. That's the purpose of the planning. So I think if that's what you're asking, when you're preparing yourselves and the learners and the employees for assessment, to complete the planning and then the doing and then the evaluating following that. So I think that's what you're asking. Hopefully that is. Do you think I've answered that correctly, Ian? Have I understood that correct?
Yeah, I think what they're saying is, do they have to mark the planning before they move on to the performing? No, you don't. It's down to the learner. The learner's doing the planning and then the performing accordingly, and then the evaluating. All right. Obviously, you can just keep an eye on it, make sure what they're doing is correct. You can't help them, I understand that, but it's making sure the learner is prepared to be able to move that forward. Depending on how many tasks, projects they're doing to cover the 85 or 45, 80 hours, sorry, or 45 hours to be able to build into that. Okay. But once the learner started, all right, it's the assessor that assesses out on site in line with what the planning is being carried out. So then they'll be able to guide that accordingly. Okay.
Thanks, Ian. There's another question here that I can answer. As there is no level 2, at what point a learner is registered on the level 3 after completing the progression? Well, the level 3 is for apprentices, so if they're employed, they wouldn't do the progression qualification. The progression is only for full-time learners. The foundation is only for full-time learners. the qualification for an apprentice would be the core qualification and the level 3 qualification. They are the two qualifications the apprentice would be registered on. A full-time learner would do the foundation, then the progression. So if a learner did the progression and then got an apprenticeship, you would sign them up onto the level 3 then. And we're working on a mapping to see what reduction there would be in learning, because much of the progression mirrors much of the level 3, because you've still got that learning to do as a young learner stroke apprentice. In the previous MEQ criteria, the learner either picked the maintenance unit or the roofing unit. Looking at the checklist, the learner must cover both. Is this correct? Jason or Ian, do you know that unit content a little bit better than myself?
Yeah, it's outlined in the employer confirmation guide. What you will find in the employer confirmation guide, the units are there, are mandatory unless it states optional. Now, the only optional units that's there, I'll be honest, is referring to the traditional skills, heritage units. That's the only ones that's optional. And CADU wanted us to put the heritage units in, not mandatory, in case a learner did cover it while on site. Well, I should say while out in industry. That's why they're there. All the units that's there, unless it says optional, have got to be covered, have got to be carried out. That's a requirement of what the review outlined. All right. I think we have to be careful here, ladies and gentlemen, as well, to be honest, because I think what Wales are doing here is perfectly right, because the nature of the industry that we've got in Wales, where 90% of the businesses are micro businesses, what we have to make sure we meet the needs of the Wales industry as it stands. All right. So that's why these particular units are mandatory units within it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, I've just been reading back quite a few questions, people confused over what an apprentice does. Just to be absolutely clear, an apprentice will do the core and the level 3. So if there's any further confusion about that, please drop it in the queries now. A full-time learner will do the foundation and the progression. So the core qualification mirrors the foundation, just with one trade area. So there's no other queries coming in. Ian, did you have a point?
Yeah, just clarify as well, Dave, the progression is for full-time learners following the foundation qualification.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that's a good point, really. Yeah, the full-time learner, it's expected the entry point will be the foundation, and then move on to the progression qualification, hopefully get employed and move on to a level 3. If a learner does a foundation and gets an apprenticeship, they'll move on to the level 3. They wouldn't then have to do the core because they've already met all the same units in the foundation qualification.
I think there's some really good questions, David. You know,
it's been an excellent webinar, some excellent questions. It helps us to see all these questions because it checks our own understanding, and if we don't have the right answer, we can go and find out. But it also tells us what the pinch points are for providers, so we can build those into our future sessions. We'll look back on these questions and build in some slides around some of these points. So we do appreciate you taking the time to join us. If there's no further questions, then we will look to close this webinar. Thank you once again to the panel, Jason, for delivering his part of the presentation, and particularly Ian, who's put together all of these dates, all of these CPD sessions and the slideshow. So big thanks to Ian for pulling all that together. And thank you all for joining us. Have a great weekend.